Hey there, and welcome everybody to our tabletop exercise. Thank you all for joining. We're gonna get rolling here in just a second. We'll give just like one more minute just to see if there's any potential late stragglers. But thank you for joining. Today is gonna be a high level tabletop exercise, as I like to refer to it. We're gonna stay pretty high level, but roll through a hypothetical incident and talk about what are those, first steps when an incident actually occurs, and try to answer some of those, basic questions that not everybody knows. What, who is that first phone call after an incident? What should you really do? And all of that. And happy to be here with Syscom and Scott over there. How's your morning going, Scott?
It's going well. Yeah, delighted to be here. I think I mentioned to you we chatted and we always go through the content before launching into these, but a lot of good feedback from the last session, and this one's going to really add to it. So I'm excited for the value it's going to deliver. It's going to deliver some information for sure that if you're on the call today or you're going to watch it later, some stuff I know for sure that you won't know going into this. So yeah, I'm excited and I'm ready to get started for sure.
Awesome, awesome, cool. Well, I think that's a perfect segue into just hopping right in. Let me go ahead
Yeah.
and share my screen. Let's pull this guy up right here. Oh, actually, you know what I can do to make sure I don't get that double effect? Let me pull this up here. Bam, and then I could share screen too. That's gonna help. Alrighty, so like I mentioned earlier, today we're going through what happens really after a cyber attack and talking about some of those first steps. So, to give you an idea of what the kind of exercise is going to look like, we're going to roll through some assumptions. We'll go through exercise guidelines, the goals there, then the actual exercise itself, some closing comments, and then always like to leave lots of room for questions and answers at the end. Of course, we just introduced ourselves. I'm John Reith, Partner Success Manager over here at DataStream Cyber Insurance. And of course, we got Scott Huxley with Syscom Business Technologies. So today, some of the assumptions I want you guys to keep in mind is, of course, these events are fictional. They're not reflective of any actual intelligence, although they are completely plausible, right? And that, kind of have happened in the past, but all of the details have been completely changed to be basically entirely new fictional event. So this exercise is also a completely, no fault learning environment. It's really a focus on the capabilities, plans, and systems that we'll be evaluating today, and to really start to get you guys thinking about these systems ahead of time. That way, if an incident ever does happen, you guys are prepared. And neither or hidden agendas or any sort of trick questions are obviously going to be a part of this. There's nothing tricky going on. It's really to go over the basics in this throughout this webinar. So to give you guys some guidelines, and really what I mean about guidelines is really things to start thinking about as we're walking through this exercise and through this incident, and really trying to put yourself kind of in the shoes of this make believe business that we're going to go through, and think about how, based on your current understanding of your security plans and capabilities, how would you react to a similar situation. But always understanding that these decisions made here in this specific exercise, they may not be reflective of the exact plan and system that you guys as an organization should have in place. This is, of course, just an example to give you guys some thoughts and ideas and get the wheels turning about your own organizations. And the last one there, I do love, like, of course, issue identification in the actual process of an incident is important. For this exercise, it's not as valuable. We're going to be really focusing on the problem solving efforts, right? It's really not truly as valuable as the new ideas that can be thought of during kind of a brainstorming exercise like this, which is what this is all about. So, some of the goals and discussion points to give you guys an idea of really some of the basic questions that we're going to chat about. Of course, at the very top, what is the first step to take when hit by an incident, right? Some of those first things, like who do I call? what is management's role in all of this when I am hit? Do I have an incident response plan in place? Why might that be important, right? Stuff like that. How are we going to try and hide the attack from the public? How communicative can we be with the public, right? So one of the bigger questions I often get, is how much do we divulge? Who do we tell? Do we tell the authorities? All of that fun stuff. And then, can we restore? What is that going to look like? What is the cost of that? Really starting to think about what are maybe the first things to start getting in place after an incident, right? What are those first systems? I don't know if Scott, you've had any sort of questions maybe you've even gotten from
Mhm.
customers around like an incident, and maybe even some of these have come up from customers.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the sad realities, of course, and why we're doing the webinar today is that there is a there is a big growth in things like ransomware, and obviously a growth in claims because of that. But yeah, I mean, I think the first one is a misunderstanding, I would say, about who we call first, because a lot of times it's I need to get hold of the IT person first, and we'll touch on that later. I know you will, in terms of, we have to be careful about what we do. But speaking to an organization just recently, actually over the last 30, 60 days, they had a ransomware incident. They had thankfully a cyber liability policy. But what was interesting in that instance is I didn't even think about this either. But the first thing that was that they learned is to do nothing. They reached out to the carrier. They had a liability policy in place, but their hands were essentially tied. Right? Maybe you'll touch on that later, but their hands were kind of tied because first thing they said is, okay, leave it to us. Don't do anything. Don't touch anything. Don't call anyone else. Don't do anything. Leave it to us. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, I say, a confusion about who to call first. B, a real um, uh, lack of understanding or not knowing necessarily how to deal with an event, because a lot of times, of course, it'll be, someone's first time, right, John, dealing with something like
Yeah.
that. I mean, we talk about it, it's in the news. It sounds like almost like someone else's problem, like it doesn't happen to me. But when you get up on a Friday morning and then you get to the office and you have to deal with something like this, people don't know what to do for the most part. So they're kind of scrambling.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's tough too, especially with, it was such a sudden shift for this cyber insurance market that it got, more complex, and actually having to understand these kind of ins and outs, especially when it did finally separate from like being covered under the general liability. It all happened kind of very quickly. And so the idea that like carriers were going out and explaining all of this to business owners is ludicrous. Of course, that didn't happen, right? So a lot of people were
Yep.
unfortunately left in the dark, and is exactly what we're trying to overcome here today, right? Is working through some of that ambiguity. So, well, let's talk about the actual exercise itself. Let's just dive right in. So, for our example today, we're using a fake company called PetGetups.com that we made up, right? It's an online retail shop. It's offering, costumes for pets. The sales have steadily grown over the years with the, advent of Zoom and online shopping and all that good stuff. And of course, customers more and more looking for, purchasing stuff for their animals nowadays. Now, the organization relies on relatively extensive IT infrastructure for both their main side and distribution, right? You got your Amazon, Etsy, all that good stuff, as well as leaning on, digital technologies for, marketing campaigns, targeted ads, all of that good stuff. Now, impulse purchases of late, and of course the idea of rapid delivery nowadays, thanks to Amazon, often tied specific events, to those actual purchases, and meaning that the delays in those purchases actually mean a lot more to the customer, right? So their reputation is directly attached to any sort of delays in those in those customer orders. And so it would be really tough, obviously, if anything was to hit them in that sense, especially since they've been grinding to build that reputation over the last several years. Now, what is their security status, right? This is an example of what a typical SMB security status might be. It might even be a little bit better than some. But for this example's sake, they do have a cyber liability insurance policy, right? They don't necessarily have great backups. They can kind of put them together slowly, right? Not necessarily any MFA in place, no incident response plan, no business impact analysis in place at the time. And then suddenly, bam, they're hit with an incident, right? BetGetups was recently in the media for making record-breaking profits, and really for their fortune of doing well as of late. But of course, this attracts the attention of attackers as well, and as a result, their CMO gets hit with a couple phishing attacks and is susceptible to one, and of course, sensitive go-to-market information gets stolen, and now these guys are demanding $500,000 in exchange for the info. And if the money's not paid in 48 hours, they're going to destroy those records, making sure that their ties to those customers are completely severed, right? Leaving those guys, stranded, those millions of customers that they've made connections with over the last couple years, and the thousands of customers that may be even waiting for those deliveries, right? The expected deliveries, which we just talked about, of course, is super important to them. So how do you respond, right? And I think that is just such a great moment to pause and really think about, and maybe even think about, obviously this is a specific scenario for a fake company, but you can obviously change some of the details, and chances are you could align it to yourselves pretty easily, right? I mean, this could fairly easily happen to any SMB that is doing any sort of business online right now. I don't know if Scott, you may have even
Mhm.
heard or know of some of the dangers around these kind of ransomware attacks and why they are so susceptible for really any sort of size of business.
Yeah, I think John, you could take the name, petgetups.com to anybusinessinamerica.com, right? It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a single business owner working from home. It doesn't matter if you are a manufacturer. It doesn't matter if you're a CPA. The reality is, it could be anybody because they just want money, really, is what it's about. And I think, some of the common kind of things that I hear a lot is, well, I'm too small. That's far from the truth. You're just a paycheck to them. They don't really care. It's the big ones, obviously, that make the news. But so I think, to your point, John, yeah, it could be any business in America.com, essentially, whether you work from home or whether you have 20 employees, it doesn't matter. And in terms as to how these things happen, they often happen because the company or individual involved, you know, um, doesn't really maybe for sure have the right kind of security posture. So that gets exposed. That gets exposed by the criminal, and that's what generates both the growth in the industry of ransomware and also the rise in data theft. And to your earlier comment about who do we tell, things like that. I've seen over the last week, for example, now ransomware gangs are allowing you to search for stolen data. So now you can't really even pretend that it didn't happen, because truth is, it's whatever happens, certainly over the next 12 months and then beyond, is going to be in the public forum. It's going to be very identifiable what happened. You won't be able to pretend it didn't exist. And I think that the common driver, John, is a security posture that's less than desirable. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? I mean, it's unfortunate how often it truly is like just them going around and checking doorknobs, right? It's like the kind of
Yep.
equivalent of them just going around and checking as many doorknobs now as they can and finding those guys that have a loose doorknob, right? And just
Yep.
walking in at that point. It is
Yeah,
unfortunate.
and again, to your point, the reality of life is the first thing that the criminals do is they're conducting penetration testing, which is, the doorknob analogy. They're just really just looking to see what's open. And a lot of times in small business, we don't just leave one door open, we leave about six. And we weren't compromised today, but what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about next month? And that's what criminals leverage, and that's what causes the growth in ransomware, and the rising claims also.
Yeah. 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 Couldn't agree more. Now, what does that first step look like, right? We've been hit with the incident. We're actually, trying to figure out who is that first call. Well, update number one in our little exercise here, about 5 minutes after the incident, hopefully, PetGetups makes a call to the data stream hotline, right? We talked earlier that they did have insurance. If they have it through data stream, they're going to get a hotline where they're connected to a breach law firm. Mullen and Coughlin is one of them, and those guys are going to be the ones to call first. You're going to want to call a lawyer and get under attorney-client privilege as fast as possible when walking through this. Just in case this happens to be dragged out, through the court of law or anything like that, they are the ones that you are going to want to chat with first. They are also going to be the ones who can walk you through it. If I walk straight into update number two, about 30 minutes, you give a call in. The first call is always free, typically, to those types of hotlines, and the breach coach is going to give you a call back and talk to you about if you do have an incident response plan in place. Let's go ahead and bust that out. Start walking through that. Those guys are not the guys to help you build the incident response plan. Ideally, you have one already in place, although, those guys still do a great job, with what they have if a business doesn't necessarily have one. So getting one in place is going to be so important, especially for the speed at which you're going to be able to overall respond to an event, understanding who is doing what, right? Who do you need to inform within your internal organization? Who's making that call, right, to the breach hotline? These are all things that should be discussed and created before. And I think is so important is creating a actual hard copy of it too, right? Is actually having a physical copy of a plan in place of actual people's phone numbers, all of that stuff, because God forbid, the day does come and you can't even get in access your computers. If all of your incident response plan exists digitally, how are you accessing it, right? They're also going to be the ones who will walk you through whether or not to pay a ransom. This is one of the bigger reasons to get on the phone with an attorney right away, is they are also going to be incredibly helpful, for discussing the legal side, right? And especially if you have an insurance policy that is ideally going to pay out, you want to make sure that you are walking through the incident, with a kind of some legal advice as well, so that you're not coming in and messing things up, kind of like Scott was talking about before, um, uh, and mentioned that I would mention one of the last things you want to do, is bring in your own kind of IT team and start fiddling around, because what you're doing is fiddling around with the forensics, right? Um, that was one of the bigger kind of, not objections, but kind of misunderstandings that I often get, right? Is that first call they always think is to the IT guy, but you really need to get a lawyer involved, as soon
Yeah.
as possible.
I think I'll just add 2 points to that, John. I think number
Yeah.
one is, by nature in our industry, we want to be helpful, right? So a lot of times if you place a call, the IT provider will want to help and want to rush out, but there's a danger in that the help that we're providing could do more harm in terms of destroying evidence and forensics. The other thing I want to mention as well, which is in the bottom slide, do we pay the ransom? How many businesses know how to go and buy Bitcoin? I mean, a lot of a lot of times a small business that gets hit with a note on their screen that says, "I need you to pay me in Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever it is." Usually Bitcoin's the go-to, but wouldn't know where to begin anyway. right? Like, I mean, I know to
Yeah.
be fair, that to give the ransomware gangs and criminals credit, they usually are very helpful in helping us understand how to do it. But a lot of times, here's what you should do, but a lot of businesses wouldn't know where to go and buy Bitcoin from in the first place or what that would look like. So, yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure for small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And so important, to have that again. Yeah, the breach coaches again are going to come back, and you guys in the audience are going to notice, the breach coaches continually throughout an incident process are going to be the guys to lean on, right? These are the guys who are handling these events every day and can walk you through it, right? And walk you through exactly those types of kind of weird questions, just like, yeah, Scott was mentioning. Okay, well, okay, I got to get it in Bitcoin, right? How do I do that? This is another beautiful example of kind of outside the box, trying to start expanding your guys' thoughts on how these incidents go down and how they can be truly unique. So, about an hour after the incident, after reviewing it, the breach codes lets them know that they literally have to go to Best Buy and buy new phones and distribute them to the core team, right? Just I love this slide because and this update of the exercise, because it's truly, I think, important to remember how unique each incident can be. And sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And sometimes that means running down and getting hard physical phones, last minute, so that you can have some sort of lines of communication, right? If absolutely everything gets, bricked in the office and you have no way, no open lines of communication, you know, how are you even setting up a recovery right at that point? So thinking about these processes again, all this goes back to having that incident response plan in place, right? It's really trying to think all through an incident and having that response plan in a hard written copy that you can find in case you walk in, everything's bricked up. So again, these guys are going to be walking through, how you communicate, what systems do you use, right? What systems may or may not be safe or unsafe at that given time to actually utilize, right? Again, all just so important questions when an incident actually occurs, right? Because all of these things, they can affect, the legal side if you just start chatting about the incident, or online, right? You obviously want to keep open lines of communication, especially with your employees, but how much do you divulge? All of that is going to be answered by those breach coaches. And then another important one, I think, that's pretty close after that update 3 is letting the ransomers know, right? So after receiving a follow-up message from the ransomers, PetGetup lets them know that they're doing everything they can, right? So the whole point of this slide is just to just that there may be a case where you have to keep lines of communication open, right? It's important to ensure that you're obviously getting as much time as you can of that 48 hours if that's what they gave you. But again, this is all going to come back to those breach coaches who will really, again, that's one of my favorite terms for them, these kind of legal cyber lawyers, so to speak, because they truly are coaches. They'll kind of help out, walk with you through it, and explain any of the weird details that might come up, like, okay, do I stay in contact? These weird questions that you don't really think about, but can have major effects if some of this gets dragged out through the legal system, things of that nature. As we jump to number 5, I think this is another important one, and these are all kind of three really back to back that all kind of squish together, I think, too, because it's all about communication and contact. And actually, the next update is kind of similar because it dives into the public. But I really like this because it's a big question I always get is, do I inform the authorities, right? And again, it comes back to it, but the breach coaches are going to be the ones who are going to let you know whether or not to let the authorities know. I think it's so important to remember that, the FBI is not there to get you guys in trouble as small business owners, right? Like, that's not their job. They're there to focus on the bad guys. And so any details that do come in about major events is really important to them. That being said, the breach coaches are going to be the ones to let you know if it's a serious enough event to chat with the FBI about, and if and really whether or not to divulge that, kind of publicly. Oftentimes the FBI does a good job of keeping it, from getting out to the public. But yeah, it's another big kind of misunderstanding that I often come across out there. Is that authorities, right? Is do I contact them? And I just think it's so important to remember they're not going after you, right? So number six, right? We're finally brought into the response portion of the actual incident, right? And the incident response team is allocated to PetGetups by the insurance carriers that are brought in to assist with the restoration, right? So the carriers, to give you guys an idea of how they're handling these, right? The carriers have their own lists of teams that they have to bring in for restoration, right? Because of course they want to make sure if they're paying for it that their money's going to the right place. That being said, they will come in and work with your IT team, whoever that may be, if it's external or internal, to obviously get an understanding of your systems and where you guys were so they can bring you back to normal, to where it was, right? So I think that's so important to also remember and think about because these guys are kind of like experts at the restoration, right? That's all they do is bring companies kind of back from these incidents, and is truly important for kind of what we were talking about earlier as well. Obviously, is just the issue that can happen is if any sort of forensics happens to get messed up during the process, it can be uh, it can make it even messier to go into a court of law and try to prove this stuff out, right, to make sure that these claims are getting paid out, right? I think that Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to touch the button. I think that during a restoration process, it can be very hard because you want to jump right on it, right? You want to jump right in, just like Scott was saying. It can be too easy to just jump in and start fixing things, but you truly do want to pause for a moment, right? And make sure that we're working with obviously the correct team and making sure to follow all the steps to make sure that the claim is actually paid for at the end of the day. But I would be curious if Scott, do you ever get this
Mhm.
question at all, or if people that maybe have even gotten the call, maybe by chance? Hopefully not too much, but
Yeah, I think the question of restoration really goes back to like lots of things. The best thing to have done something is 20 years ago, right? So the best time to set up good restoration is now when you don't need it, right? And a lot of times what we see is situations where really people don't have, or organizations and entities don't have the right makeup to be able to restore. We know as an industry, John, that criminals go after backups first, right? That's the first thing that they target. So you almost have to think like a criminal. So what's the first thing they want to take out? They want to take out your ability to restore. They're not going to get paid if you're able to, restore. So a lot of times in the restoration process, John, we see where the restoration process hasn't been thought about. And I've, met companies and entities where they've been down for 2, 3 weeks because the ability to restore, wasn't built in mind to get them restored in, 2 hours, or it didn't account for the fact that if I just have one type of backup and that gets wiped out, well, then what do I do? Right? Like, let's say I have a backup and it's working and it's great, but the criminals come along and wipe it out. Where's my plan B? So a lot of times, John, I think in the restoration process, businesses find out that it's not engineered as well as it could have been, and we find out at that time. So again, the reoccurring theme, John, is restoration process has not been thought out well, and it's not been engineered robustly enough to get them back up and running at an appropriate time.
yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's right now, it's tough out there because there's a lot of people that it's it's not exactly the open door, but that's exactly what the bad guys are looking for, right? Is a lack of security and a lack of ability to get back up and running, right? The faster that you can get back up and running, that's the ability to almost tell them to go pound sand, so to speak, right? And having those kind of tools and technologies in place is what makes it so crucial to be able to actually go tell them, to go pound sand, right? If you can get, just like you said, if you can get back up and running in hours, anything they do is not going to be super, dangerous to you, right? So
Yeah, and
as
I'd
we
say,
jump, yeah, yeah, no,
sorry,
keep
I was
going.
going to say, John, to add to that, so anyone that's on the call today is think beyond having just one means of backup, right? So hopefully, people on the call here today, or at least in the future, will have not just a one type of backup that's maybe on site, but maybe there's a form of offsite replication of that data as well. What we're trying to do is limit our risk by not just having one type of backup, but at least having two and potentially three, so that we can pull that data from another source if we have to. So that was just a comment and words of advice and encouragement I want to share with people today, is explore more than just one, and hopefully your business today, or in the future at least, will have a strategy that will include some sort of cloud backup on top of what you're probably doing today.
Yeah. Yeah, redundancy, right, is
Yes.
so
Yeah.
important in this day, in this digital day and age, right? Is having multiple copies in multiple places where you can access them, right? And a
Yep.
cloud one and a physical one, right? In multiple places. So if yeah, that classic "don't have all your eggs in one basket," right? Is
Amen. Yeah.
so important in this day and
Yep.
age. Yeah.
Could not agree more.
Yeah. Yeah, and so jumping into, so we've gotten the restoration going, right? We've, or at least gotten the team on, right? We've at least met the team that has been brought on by our carriers, right? From that list, pulled in from that list, and as we're starting to meet with them, the next thing Mullen Coughlin are going to let Pet GetUps know is they do need to inform, right, both their customers and their employees of the incident, right? This goes back to the what I was talking about earlier with the lines of communication, right? All of this before this moment has been all internal lines, right? The going to get the phones, all of that stuff was to make sure that we can at least keep internal lines of communication. But now they've officially let us know, okay, we do need to inform the customers of the actual incident, because obviously some of those customers are not going to be able to get their orders maybe in time, right? Or maybe be able to order right now, right? So whatever the situation may be, they do need to inform the customers. So I think it's so important to start thinking about how to contact the customers, right? Sometimes that could mean maybe direct social media messages if it's that desperate, right? If you don't have necessarily the lists of emails, right, that are up, that are maybe saved on a hard drive on a computer, but your social media, LinkedIn has got all your customer, or a bunch of your customer contacts, right? Or whatever it may be, there could be a very unique situation of how you're going to go about reaching out to these customers. This is again one of the things that a breach coach is going to come in handy for, right? Is because they're going to be able to sit down and talk to you about how to reach out to them, which is important, of course, right? Is the how, figuring that out. But I think of the more important is what to say to them, right? How much to actually divulge, how much to tell them is so important, right? For reputation, and making sure to at least maintain, to the best of your ability, some of those customer relationships, right? Is going to end up being kind of leaning on how you're explaining to them this incident is going down, right? Because of course, things like trust are going to take a hit, right? The general customer is going to have a hard time if a company, if a company they're used to using gets hit by an incident, so you're going to lose some. So making sure that that's minimized is going to be oh so important as you're walking through the lines of communication. But now we're on to the actual restoration, right? So PetGetUps contacts that technical team. We're getting the restoration process rolling. They're actually going to go in and connect the internal I team with the restoration team, make sure everybody's on the same page. And one of my favorite words on this line is how do you carefully get back up and running, right? Carefully. We want to make sure we're doing all of the right things. And that's exactly why these carriers lean on like a specific restoration team. And they've got a list of basically vetted guys that do these restorations, right? Is because they know how to carefully get you back up and running. But also thinking about those costs of restoration ahead of time, I think is so important as well, right? What truly, if you go down for a week, what does that look like for you, and your business? If you go down for a month, what does that look like, right? And really thinking about the actual costs associated with going down for a portion of time, getting maybe if it's files stolen, what do those fees look like, right? It might be PCI fees if personal information of customers gets released, really starting to think through the costs of an incident ahead of time. All of that obviously is only going to help you when an incident actually occurs, actually happens there. And the last slide here, as we're moving through and almost restored, is PetGetups carefully restores their website from an old backup that they found, and that's one of my favorites because it's another out of the box, right, kind of thinking, and I think so. I think segues kind of perfectly into what we've already been discussing here, which is the importance of redundancy, right? Especially as we look back on kind of this example here where these guys almost got lucky, right? They happened to basically have this kind of old backup that they had laying around, right? Didn't necessarily have like a cloud backup. And, this level of redundancy without another level, this could have easily gone another direction, right? If they had lost this backup. They happen to find it, in like a closet somewhere. They happen to have it laying around. If they didn't happen to have that, this is a completely different story, and the cost probably exponentially rises at that point to rebuild the entire website. But at least with the guidance of the restoration team, they're able to get that website back up. And I think, yeah, just the question of do you have old systems laying around, but coming comes, I think, more to an important point that Scott was talking about of having multiple layers. I mean, it's redundancy is a almost an insurance term that or at least when I think of it as an insurance term because it's used just so often in the insurance space. But yeah,
Yeah.
curious
I,
yeah,
I,
you yourself have seen any unique backups or just would love to, yeah, get your thoughts on it.
yeah, I think, John, the interesting thing is how many people today on the call maybe don't have a backup of their website. Luckily, this one was found. But I think a lot of times, if you just take the website as an example,
Mm,
it's a thing that's
yeah.
certainly client facing. Um, but a lot of times the website was made for you by a marketing company, right? They, you got the website, it's up and running, but are the backups of that around? Like in this case, thankfully they were able to restore it. But a lot of times, that website was built, many years ago by a marketing company. The marketing company may have sold or be no longer in business, or it may have been someone that you knew that put together the website for you, whatever it was. And a lot of times people don't have those things. So again, I think if you can start to think about these things today while you're not in this situation, thankfully, it will help you be prepared in the event that something does happen, that you do know where to go and get that back up from, and it will be there basically. So yeah, there's lots of things that going back to what we touched upon earlier, John, which was restoration. If we start thinking about these things now, we can plan for them. But if you're not backing up a critical database, or you don't have a backup of your website, you might find out if something happens like this that you don't have it available to you. And then what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, just like you were saying, having that plan ahead of time, having, what's often referred to as like a business impact analysis of basically, working through what are those important systems, right? What's
Mhm.
most important to you as a company to get back up and running first, right? And and making sure those backups are the ones that are ready to go, right? Like whether it's the website, right? If your website is the most important one, right? Making sure that that one is the one that's ready to go first, right? Whatever is going to be most crucial to getting your business back up and running, right? Whether it's a website, credit card, what have you, and thinking about all that ahead of time is the only way to go about it, because otherwise you're scrambling to figure out what systems are important, and what actually needs to get up and running first, and doing all of that in the middle of an incident is only going to lengthen out the incident itself, right? It's only going to reduce the or increase the time it takes to get back up and running in the first place.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would say, John, too, to the people that are on the call, if you have backups that are set up, a lot of times, John, the backups were set up 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? And things have
Mm,
changed since. So just because you looked at it, I don't know, 2 years ago or 3 years ago when it was set up, I encourage everyone to take a good long look at that and make sure it's appropriate for today, because a lot of things change over time and we don't adjust accordingly. So again, you've got to have a good backup. You've also got to have a plan B for that backup. But you've also got to also recognize that, hey, if it was set up 2 or 3 years ago, it may not be appropriate for today. So we can address some of these things that you've been mentioning, such as websites and other things that maybe maybe they didn't need to worry about that 2 years ago or even a year ago. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, these last 2 years have been such a change. Yeah, it's been an absolute change. And but as we come into our, concluding points here, some big points I'd love to leave you all with as an audience. After walking through this, what would you change about your current security program, even if it's as simple as, well, I don't have an incident response plan. Let's go, maybe let's go put something like that together, right? But really starting to think about, based off some of the stuff we've seen here. And again, I know it is all high level, right? We wanted to make sure to not get too into the nitty gritty with these exercises that we do. But obviously, more than happy to dive in deeper with anybody that would like to. Don't hesitate to let us know. Um, but continuing down, what can your organization do to prevent ransomware attack in the future, right? Thinking about these things that we've been discussing, like having these backups in place, maybe investing in some tools and technologies, right? These things like MFA, maybe having insurance, right? Somebody who's going to pay out that ransomware instead of you paying it out. When one of these attacks occurs, how would you improve the processes to recover, right? And that's again going kind of once again into maybe we do get an offsite backup, right? So that we have our maybe our on-site one, but we also have our off-site one. So if something happens to one, God forbid the office burns down, that hard copy's gone there. We got the offsite one. If the offsite one gets attacked, we got the onsite one, right? That redundancy is so important. But again, the whole idea behind this high level exercise was obviously to answer some basic questions of what those initial steps in an incident should look like and might look like, but also to really kind of open the brains a bit and help get you guys thinking about these things ahead of time, right? And start to try and implement some of these and go talk to some experts ahead of time, right? Sit down with an actual IT expert who can work through, your systems and let you know, what are the most important for getting back up and running and online, and what can you do to make that happen faster and all of that. How do we get some of these backups in place, right? Having a go-to IT expert for all that only makes all of this easier, right? But yeah, would love any concluding discussion points from you, Todd. Any wrap ups that you'd like to leave them with before we open things up for questions and answers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing for everyone on the call, and again, people who have listened to the recording, is to, rather than assume that it's not going to happen. I think if you can assume it is going to happen versus it's not going to happen, it will change your frame of reference, right? Because most of us assume that it won't happen, yet somebody goes in on a Monday morning or or leaves for the weekend and it does happen. So I think if we can change our mindset, if we look at the numbers aren't very encouraging in terms of where this is heading. It's certainly not getting better. It's getting worse. But if we change our mindset a little bit, John, towards like assuming it's going to happen versus not, and then it will change the steps that we take, and it'll allow us. And you got some really good questions on the last slide in terms of, I think those are very pertinent questions that everyone can take away and think long and hard. Like, what would we change? Those types of things, and what processes could we add that maybe we don't have today? So I think those are great points, but I think my thing I want to share with everyone today is, let's start to begin assume that something like this is going to happen, and then work backwards from there, rather than assuming that it's not. And it doesn't matter who you work with, because again, if you don't know where your security posture is sitting, you're going to probably be liable for a surprise. But I would encourage everyone to kind of assume the worst and then plan accordingly, so we don't get caught with a surprise. Because a lot of times we went through this deck pretty quickly, but a lot of times people are scrambling. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of frustration, a lot of scrambling around when this happens. We just went through it, or you just went through it very calmly. It's not very calm
Yeah.
in a small business of any size, whether you're just a single person or whether you've got 20 or 200 people. It's very frenetic. It's very stressful. So let's adjust accordingly. And I would urge everyone to, let's start thinking about when it does happen, and then work backwards from there. And obviously at that point, we really hope it doesn't. But let's plan on it happening versus it not happening, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's the way we've always been going. I mean, as more and more of the business world starts to move into the cyberspace, it's just, you're by nature you're going to have more bad actors also in that space. It just also happened that it was, I think, juiced up and rapidly increased over the last 2 years, thanks to, of
Yep.
course, everything that happened and everybody going home. And so suddenly, this all kind of suddenly happened, and people are like, wait, I suddenly need MFA and all these different tools and such. And well, I mean, yeah, it was always moving in that direction. It's been moving in that direction, for the past, ever since the internet, internet was invented, and businesses have been slowly moving into it, right? But
Mhm.
now it's just rapidly jumped into, really a need at this point. I mean, it's always been important, but it just makes sense too as we move forward and forward. It's just going to become more and more of a need. And so starting to truly think of cybersecurity as a budget now instead of a cost, right? I think it's just been thought of as a cost for so long, by your typical SMB, kind of understandably, for a long time. But now it really is a budget. If you're doing, it really truly is now a kind of a need to do business, is being in the cyberspace, and there are bad actors that live there. So let's get you protected from them. But well, beautiful. That brings us to our wrap up here. Always like to leave lots of room for questions and answers, and we'll obviously leave our points of contact up, for you guys. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or concerns, that you may have about the exercise itself, or maybe you want to dive in a little deeper, on some more examples, fun stuff like that. Don't hesitate to let us know. We're happy to connect. But yeah, we'll pause here. Make sure to drop any questions, concerns that you guys have in the chat below. But that's going to wrap up our webinar. Thank you all for joining, and obviously we'll hang around for a while here, and answer some Q&A. But super super glad to have you all on. It was a great
Yeah.
time.
We'll wait for the questions. I do want to share. So we will be publishing this onto our YouTube channel. We'll also have the prior session that we did as well. So this is part of, if you're joining this session and you weren't part of the earlier session, this is part 2 of that. So that'll be available on the YouTube channel. If you go to syscombusiness.com, as soon as we have the information pulled up, scroll to the bottom of the page, there's a YouTube link right there. You can go ahead and check all these out. But in the future, not just our partnership here with John, but obviously other material that we work with on our partners to get you as much information as we can. We'll put them on our Educate channel on YouTube, so it'll be available to everyone, kind of on demand. So, but yeah, I don't see any questions, John. We blind that I'll say you, not me, but we blinded them with information. They are all good now. They're fully educated.
I was gonna say, yeah, they're all experts. They're good to
Yes.
go. No,
Yep.
no questions or
No.
concerns
Nothing.
whatsoever. Oh well, I'll just take that as I did a halfway decent job of walking through
Yes.
the exercise and.
Yeah. John says thank you
Eh,
very much. So yeah, there we
oh
go.
yeah, our
Mission
pleasure,
accomplished.
John. Yeah, yeah, it was a great time. Yeah, I think it's important and obviously this is a high level, tabletop exercise, right, guys? And if you haven't done one yet, chat with and actually chat with Syscom, maybe do a deeper dive into your guys' processes and maybe put on your own little tabletop, maybe more
Yep.
personalized kind of tabletop exercise, something
Yep.
fun that I think is super important and can really help prepare you for an incident, right? Is going through an actual hypothetical incident, but
Yep.
obviously swap out your company and all the details that would entail and could be one of the best ways to start to create that incident response plan, right? Is go set up like a tabletop exercise and then actually start to write out that incident response plan as you're kind of walking through it with an IT expert and figure all that out with your guys, your go-to IT consultant, whoever that may
Yeah.
be.
Great idea.
Awesome, guys. Well, that's a wrap on our webinar. You're all free to go. We'll close it out here. I'll stick around for just another moment in case any last minute questions happen to come in. But thank you again, everybody, for joining. I had a great time with you all. You're absolutely welcome, Chris. Yeah, and keep your eyes peeled. Me and Scott will definitely be putting more of these on in the future. We'll keep you all posted, but we'll absolutely be putting on more. Absolutely, Ken. And let me know if you have any questions or would like to jump on a call or anything like that. Or you can respond to my email that you may have seen earlier. All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining. We're going to go ahead and end the broadcast now, but we'll talk with you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.